The horse chestnuts along the mall were doing that thing they do in June, throwing shade so thick and green it felt almost defiant, like they knew what was happening beneath them and decided to protect it anyway. She stood at the window for longer than she needed to. Not looking at the crowd. Not really. Looking through it, maybe. At the blur of red uniforms and tilted hats, at the flags snapping and the kind of wind that doesn't cool you, just reminds you the air is moving. George was pressed against the glass beside her, nose almost touching it, his breath making small ghost circles that appeared and vanished. "There's Papa," he said. Not a question. A declaration. The way children say things they've waited weeks to say out loud. Charlotte heard it and came skidding across the floor in her good shoes, which Catherine had specifically asked her not to run in, and she didn't say a word about it. Some battles you don't fight on trooping days. Louis, for his part, was sitting in the corner with a biscuit and a private arrangement with the universe that seemed to involve neither shoes nor socks, and Catherine had made her peace with that too. The socks were in her bag. There was always a bag. The balcony appearance was what it was. Practiced and real in equal parts, that particular tightrope the family had walked for so long the balancing had become something close to muscle memory. She smiled. She waved. She held Louis's hand when he started doing the thing with his arm that looked less like waving and more like he was trying to summon a helicopter. She was tired. Not publicly. Never publicly. But, in the marrow deep way that comes from months of something you don't fully talk about, the kind of tired that lives below words and shows up only in small, private moments. The pause before you stand. The second it takes to find your smile. She found it. She always found it. The car afterwards was quiet in the way that only happens when children have burned everything they had. George sat with his jacket half unbuttoned, staring out his window with the glassy concentration of someone processing something too large for his current emotional vocabulary. Charlotte had her head tipped back, not asleep, just done. Louis had located the socks at some point and was now using one as a hand puppet against the window, narrating a story to himself in a whisper that Catherine was making no effort to decode. She watched the city slide past. London in June, gold-lit and self-important, always performing its own grandeur back at itself. She'd loved it once in a way that was purely uncomplicated, a girl arriving for the first time and feeling the sheer scale of the thing, the history compacted into every stone. Now she loved it differently. The way you love something that has cost you things. Tenderly. Carefully. With full knowledge of what the cost was. "Mum," Charlotte said, without lifting her head. Louis is licking the window." "Louis," Catherine said. Louis looked at her. Considered her. Returned to his puppet show. This was a Tuesday energy in a Sunday costume. She knew it. She let herself know it, which felt like progress. The car turned, and there it was, the familiar dip in the road, the trees closing in, the way Windsor softens at the edges the further you get from the ceremony of it. Adelaide Cottage sat behind its hedges like something keeping a promise. Small by every standard that people outside those hedges applied to them. Exactly right by every standard that mattered. She had asked for small. She had meant it. The shoes came off at the door. All of them. Even hers. There was something almost ceremonial about it, the good leather lined up in a row, the formality of the morning shed along with them, and what was left underneath just a family in socked feet and rumpled collars moving through the particular afternoon quiet of a house that had learned to hold its breath with them. The garden was William's first. She heard the door open before she'd even reached the kitchen, heard Charlotte's voice spike upward with the specific frequency it used exclusively for grass underfoot and no schedule in sight. George followed at a measured pace, which made her smile. He was 12 now in his bearing if not his years. Carrying himself like someone rehearsing for something. She stood at the kitchen window with both hands around a mug of tea she hadn't drunk yet and watched them. Louis was already shoeless again. Obviously. Running a trajectory that made no geographic sense whatsoever, arms out, possibly an aeroplane, possibly an argument he was having with a bird. William crouched to Charlotte's level and listened to something she was telling him with the whole body attention he gave things when he was choosing to be fully present, when the other world wasn't pressing its thumb into his afternoon. Catherine wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. The tea had gone lukewarm without her noticing. That happened more lately. Small moments of losing track. Not frightening, not the losing track she'd learned to fear in darker months, just the ordinary drift of a mind that was putting itself back together and doing it quietly, without announcement, on its own timeline. She'd stopped apologizing for that to herself sometime in the spring. She wasn't sure exactly when. Only that one morning she'd noticed she hadn't done it in a few days and that it felt like something worth noting. Charlotte came in at 3:30 with grass stains on the knees of her ceremony tights, assessed her own situation with a clear-eyed pragmatism beyond her years, and said these were going to get ruined eventually. Were they? Catherine said. At some point, yes. This is your logic. It's good logic. She had William's confidence and Catherine's composure wrapped around something that was entirely and only Charlotte, a sort of luminous self-possession that occasionally made Catherine feel like she was watching someone who had already survived things and simply hadn't encountered them yet. She pulled her daughter into a hug that lasted 3 beats longer than Charlotte expected. Mum. I'm fine. I know. She held on anyway. Some things you do not do because the other person needs it. William found her in the garden at dusk. She'd taken her tea out there, fresh this time, actually hot, and sat in the wooden chair that had weathered 3 winters now and was starting to look like it had opinions. The light was doing what it did in late June, that long golden refusal to leave. The hedges had gone dark at the edges. The roses William had planted the previous autumn, the ones she'd watched him pace around and worry over with an uncharacteristic horticultural anxiety, were enormous. Blowsy and excessive and slightly unruly. She liked them enormously. He sat in the chair beside her and, for a while neither of them said anything. That was the thing about a long time together, the silences stopped being uncomfortable and became a kind of vocabulary. This one meant, it was a big day. This one meant, we are both tired. This one meant, we made it through and the children are inside and the world can wait until tomorrow. She reached over without looking and found his hand. Charlotte's tights, he said. I know. She seemed very at peace with it. She had a full argument ready. He laughed. The real one, not the public one. The one that lived lower in his chest and barely made a sound. She thought about the balcony. The crowd. The particular weight of standing there this year, not performing normalcy but actually attempting to locate it, to feel it underneath her feet like solid ground, after months of ground that hadn't been solid at all. She thought about how she hadn't told most people how hard it had been. Not because she was hiding. Because there weren't words for all of it. Because some things are lived and not narrated, and the living of them has to be enough. The roses moved in what was left of the evening wind. She didn't say any of this. She didn't need to. Not with any of them specifically. With the general concept of bedtime and its enforceable reality. Catherine sat on the edge of his bed and listened to him make his case, something about how the sun was still out and the sun was technically a clock and the clock said not yet, and she nodded with enormous seriousness, and when he finally ran out of objections he was asleep before she'd finished tucking the duvet. Children. Their whole lives in a single bedtime. She turned the lamp down, not off. Left the door the 3 inches he preferred. Stood in the corridor for a moment with her hands still on the doorframe, just listening to the silence that followed. The particular held-breath quality of a house once children are finally down. George's light was still on. She knocked once. He said come in with the tone of someone who had been expecting her, which was probably true. He was reading. An actual book, spine cracked, halfway through. He looked up and, for a second she saw him as both things simultaneously, the boy who had stood on that balcony today with his chin up and his collar straight, and the child who used to bring her drawings of dinosaurs with anatomically questionable proportions and absolute conviction in their scientific accuracy. Good day, she asked. He thought about it. Genuinely considered the question, which was something he'd started doing this year. Treating answers as things worth arriving at carefully. "Yes," he said. "Then, you looked happy." "On the balcony." She paused. The corridor light behind her made a soft rectangle across the floor. "I was," she said. He looked at her for a second longer than usual. Not searching for something she was hiding. Confirming something he'd already found. "Good," he said. And went back to his book. She found Charlotte already half asleep, her hair still pinned in the bottom half of the ceremony style, the rest having escaped at some point during the garden's most enthusiastic phase. She was the kind of child who could fall asleep with the lights on and a podcast playing and a full unresolved argument on the table, and Catherine envied it with a depth that was almost philosophical. She sat on the edge of the bed. Charlotte opened one eye. "The tights were already compromised," she said. "Charlotte." From the balcony. "The wind." "Go to sleep. I just want that on record. Good night." She kissed her forehead. Charlotte made a small satisfied sound and closed the eye. Catherine sat there for a moment longer than she needed to. She thought about what it cost to show up for things. Not in the abstract, not in the public language of duty and service and resilience that people used about her family like they were talking about a weather system rather than human beings who had bad nights and good gardens and children who licked windows and argued about tights. What it actually cost. The private arithmetic. What you gave and what you had left and what you slowly, carefully rebuilt. She had been rebuilding for a while now. She was not finished. She was not sure she would ever be finished in the way people imagined, fully restored, fully arrived, back to whatever before had been. Before had been a different person in some ways. She was becoming someone who included all of it. The hard winter. The long quiet. The afternoon when she first walked back into the garden without thinking about how she was walking, without monitoring herself for signs of something wrong, just walking. That afternoon had been unremarkable and extraordinary in equal measure. Like today. William was downstairs when she came back down. He'd made more tea, there were 2 mugs, which meant he'd heard her on the stairs, and the television was off and the house was at rest around them in that deeply particular way it had at night when the children were sleeping and the world outside had stopped knocking. She sat down. Picked up the mug. It was the right temperature. "George said something," she said. "What did he say?" "That I looked happy." On the balcony. William was quiet for a moment. "You did," he said. Outside the window, the garden was dark. The roses were just shapes now, just a suggestion of the enormous things they were in the daylight. The horse chestnuts had gone still. The June evening had finally let itself become night. She thought about the crowd. The flags. The horses. The long walk back through the ceremony of it to the small specific cottage with the wooden chair and the unruly roses and the children with their grass-stained tights and their sock puppets. She thought about the woman who had stood at that window this morning, looking through the crowd at the blur of it, carrying the weight of the months between then and now. She had carried it. She had walked out onto that balcony and smiled and meant it. Both things were true. She drank her tea. Let the silence say the rest. Some days are just days. And some days are proof. This was both.